Hey everybody, welcome to the Book Leads Impactful Books for Life and Leadership. I'm your series host and leadership performance coach, John Jaramillo. This podcast series is about getting to the books that have impacted the lives of my network, colleagues, friends, connections, new and old. I want to get to these great leads and hear their stories about the books that have impacted them, making the biggest impression on them, on their work, their life, no matter what it may be, what it is they draw out from these books. And the three types of books that I cover are books that they're sharing with me that I've never covered or read myself, books that we've read together, whether for the series specifically or in our past lives before the series, and then a book that they've either published or written themselves to get the message of their book out there, what it is that they want to share with their audience. So for today's episode, I have another author on tap, and my guest today is Erin Harrigan. And Erin is a Christian wife, empty nest mom, speaker, author, and business coach on a mission to help high achieving Christian women level up their businesses without compromising their faith. Bringing to bear her 20 or 30 plus years of corporate work and 10 plus years of network marketing, she helps women be more focused and fruitful by aligning business strategy and goals to God's truth through her customized business coaching, speaking, and award-winning podcast, Redefining Hustle, Pursuing Success as a Christian Woman. Erin is the author of Pursuing Success God's Way, a practical guide to hustle with heart. And I was introduced to Erin by Laura DeFranco, who's a book publishing business strategist who's coordinating the release of an anthology that I'll be a part of this summer. It's coming out in July this year, 2023. And it's called The Ultimate Guide to Being a Successful Soul Professional, 22 Powerful Growth Strategies for Up-Leveling Your Soul-Aligned Business. And in that particular chapter that I contribute to that book, it's a breaking down my signature talk, platinum networking, designing a unique experience for others in a world of disconnection. So that was the talk. The chapter is more about digging into my past and where that comes from. Believe me, in writing that chapter, I kind of figured out what is the impetus for that? What's the spark for that? It all comes down to my parents. I've talked about them plenty on this series, working with them, living with them, hearing their advice, even when I didn't want it. But it's amazing how all that advice we get from our parents and the adults in our past, the way it doesn't resonate then, but it trickles into the work we do now. So again, Laura was the one that's working with us on that. She introduced me to Erin. Erin and I talked about the work she's doing, the work that I'm doing with this series. And here we are. So Erin, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, John, it's such an honor to be here. I'm really excited for this conversation.
And we were just talking before I hit record, and Erin, obviously, as I mentioned before, has her own podcast. She just hit 200 episodes, but she was telling me that she had even more than that 200 are the numbered ones. So
right.
I know what kind of work goes into it. It's just amazing that you've achieved that benchmark. So congratulations.
Thank you. It's so wild to think it all started because God had given me this message and my coach at the time said, "Well, you should do a podcast. Like that's how it will reach people." And I thought, "Okay, well, I plugged in my little headphones, like I didn't have a professional mic or anything, right?" And now to look back and think, I have done this every week for 4 years. Like, wow.
Yeah, that's huge. I'm not going to lie
Yeah.
with this. It's like, I love doing it, but there is a commitment, there is an energy to maintain.
Yeah.
The curiosity is there, but to be on like every week that much, digging into who you're talking to or who or
Mhm.
what you're talking
Mhm.
about, what your mission is in that podcast, I get it. So I'm hoping to reach that number. We'll see.
I think you will. You just got to keep going.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So, Erin, as we get started, I always ask who are you today? I read your bio, but what is the work that you do today? What does that look like?
Yeah, the work that I do today is very much centered around professional, successful women who have had their own business for a while. They've experienced a level of success and they know that it's time to scale it or level it up. But they know that they don't want to do business as usual, the way that they've been doing business all this time. They're depleted, they're often very much overachievers, and they think if I'm going to scale this, aside from the automation and the outsourcing and all the pieces, I have to do this in a way that honors my faith and my priorities, my family, etc. So I help them break out of doing business as usual. And that really comes down to letting God lead. And for many of them, that's a little bit scary because while they have a relationship with God, they like to be in control.
Mhm.
I am the same. And it's a little scary to kind of put that in his hands because what if he redirects it? What if he takes you down a different path? What if he changes course? Right. But it allows them to experience a new level of clarity, serenity, joy, and fulfillment in the business that they're doing. And that's what I love to do. Currently, I do that through one on one coaching, a group coaching membership, and then through my speaking and my podcast.
Awesome. How many books do you have, Erin?
I currently have one, and I've
Okay.
been told that when you're an author, you never just write one book.
Yeah,
And
that believe me, that's the only reason I ask. And it's not like, oh, you've only written one. Haha. No, like I know from the people that I've met on this series, I
yeah,
know that once they get that writing in and they get their a book, any book out, it's like they get that itch. We were just talking before we hit record about,
yeah,
you have some free time coming up. It's easy to get stuck in that trap of just sitting down and writing. So that's
right.
the only reason I ask, just
Yeah,
because I know that bug bites and it can and it can drag you into more writing. So that's the only
100%.
reason I'm curious.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I feel like I have more books in me. I just don't know what they are yet. So we'll
Yeah,
see.
no, yeah, it's a journey. So I'm sure you'll figure something out.
Yeah, for sure.
So, Aaron, also to understand how you've gotten here, what did your path into your career look like? Whether it was college, family, happenstance, what was it that started your path, after high school or whatever it may have been, into creating who you are? Even if you knew it wasn't going to end here, maybe if you had some other idea aside from where you are now, what did that beginning of the journey look like?
Well, growing up as the oldest of 4 to a single mom, in and out of poverty, I knew very early on that to change the trajectory of my future was going to take money. And interestingly, recently, I sort of had a breakthrough that, wow, for a really long time, I thought money was my savior. Like it was going to change everything in our life. So I went to college, I graduated, I started on the corporate track. And there wasn't, you didn't that back then we looked at jobs in the paper, right? And I was a sociology major and you just didn't look up like that. It's not like accountant, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So I got on the sales track pretty quickly. I'm good with people. I love the conversation of like, what problem can I solve? So I got on the sales track pretty quickly, and over 30 years, worked my way through sales and then directing sales teams and corporate leadership, etc. About 23 or so years into that journey, I was pretty burnt out, traveling all the time, not seeing my kids, making lots of money, but not having time to really enjoy it. Very, very different quality of life than I have now. And so I started a network marketing or multi-level marketing business in 2010 and started to build that. And I have been, I say, a recovering driver, striver, and achievement chaser. So I go and I go and I go and I go. And the challenge with that is you never stop. So that was my career up to about 2014. In 2014, I had this moment where I looked in the mirror and I had the success, and I thought, this sucks. Like this does not feel like I thought it would. And so I reached out to a mentor of mine in my business at the time, and she said, you two things. One, you're an ultra responsible person, and so you think that you have to carry all of this on your own, and that's made you successful to this point. But to grow the way you want to grow, something has to change. And the second thing she said is, I don't think you know who you are or whose you are. Do you have a personal relationship with Jesus? And at the time, I was very sort of like, I believed in God, but I was also very new age. And I didn't have a personal relationship. But from the vantage point where I was face down on the floor, I looked up and thought, if this is a promise that my life can be different, then I'm taking her up on that. So gave my life to Christ. And that very much changed how I view and do business from that point forward. That it didn't have to be this grind and it didn't have to be this sort of hero's journey, if you will. That it's only worth it at the end when you've worn yourself out.
Hmm.
And so it really changed all of the ways I'd been taught to do business, all the ways I had been taught entrepreneurs are to operate. And from there, in 2018, God really began to shift the work I was doing and said, okay, now you've learned how to do this my way. I want you to go teach my daughters who are exactly like you, overwhelmed, overachieving, all the things. And so that's really where it led. So the person I am today, like, yes, I'm still driven, and yes, I'm still focused and goal oriented, but I look at it from a very different perspective. And while I do earn money and money is important because it's an exchange for value, I'm
Hmm.
not so wrapped up in what that number looks like or what my title is or what stage I'm on. So it's been quite an experience.
Now, does it make sense from your childhood? I mean, was there any the next question I usually ask is does looking back in hindsight, does it make sense that this is where you found yourself based on what your childhood was? But then you told me
Mhm.
your experience in finding Christ was later in life. What how old were you at that point?
46.
Okay. So, I mean, does it make sense at all from your childhood and your experience then that this is where you would find yourself? Or how can you tie it? What are the tie-ins from your childhood?
Yeah, what's fascinating is when I was in high school and we did those, I don't even know if they do these in the yearbook anymore, like our last will and testament, like here's where I'm going to go. And I had a vision that like my vision was, oh, I'm going to go get my degree in psychology and then I'm going to become a therapist and that's what I'll do. My mom was a social worker, like that's kind of where I wanted to go. And so it's really fascinating to me that I've always been in a place among my peers, among the teams I was part of, among my friendships and relationships, that I was the person that could kind of take this 30,000-foot view of a situation and distill it and help them think differently about it. So I think I've kind of been doing that all of my life. Um, so it doesn't surprise me that God gave me very specific gifts and talents around that and then said, okay, now you're going to take what you've learned and combine it with that, and you're going to go help these people.
Um, what does leadership mean to you, Aaron? How
Mm.
would you describe it?
I used to think, John, that leadership was all about position and title and role. And what I learned even before coming to Christ is that you can be a leader without any of that. I had read a book by Robin Sharma, Leader Without a Title, and it is such an incredible story that helps you understand that you can lead from wherever you are, right? And sometimes you need to lead from wherever you are. So leadership to me is really about how you show up in the work that you're doing, in the life that you're leading from a place of acknowledging and hearing and seeing others, and then leading from a place of that love and understanding that you don't have to be the executive to do the leadership, right? And that we all have some sphere of influence. So it's how do we use that influence in a way, from my perspective, that furthers
Mhm.
the kingdom, but that also makes the world a better place.
Yeah. Aaron, can you speak a little more just in that shift of mentality going from the money to what it is after that, what it is now? What does that look like?
Mhm.
So where before obviously society's script is go to school, get a job, break your back, work up the hierarchy, make that money that way, chase success of this is the definition of success you should be
Mhm.
chasing. What does it look like now? Is the reward in that ripple effect of sharing it with the women that are
Mhm.
tapping into that same level of love for Jesus that you have, that tapping into their faith? Is that what it
Mhm.
what
Mhm.
carries you, pushes you forward?
Yeah, success is so different to me now.
Yeah.
It used to be that success, of course, was the money and the title and the accolades and the recognition and all the pieces. And what I found in that is because that's what I always thought success was, that I expected it to completely fill me. So then when I had that moment in 2014, I was shocked to find, like, wait a minute, I have all of those things and I'm still unhappy. And I've been chasing success my whole life. Now for me, success is a couple of things. One is the taking money and all of that off of the pedestal
Hmm.
and giving it to God. That
Hmm.
he is ultimately my leader and where I find fulfillment. Success is knowing that my identity is anchored in him and not in my productivity, not in my outcomes, not in my results. Success is having the ability to spend time the way I want to with my family, but also being fulfilled in the work that I do. And yeah, the last thing that you said, I mean, success is really having that front row seat to someone's transformation, whatever that transformation looks like. Maybe their business grew 20 or 30%, or maybe they just realized that they need to move in a different direction in their business, or maybe they realize that they need to expand, right? It's these sort of intangible, more maybe more emotional things,
Mm.
but I don't tie my identity to it because all of those things that the world says are success is constantly changing. I mean, let's think about the pandemic, right? Like everybody's on a trajectory to do something, and then there's a pandemic. So if your identity is wrapped up in that something or that achievement, and then it goes away, then who are you? And so
Mm.
that's very different for me now.
Yeah. Again, because we we jumped into a quick, deep conversation before we started recording.
Yeah,
You would ask me, how are things are going or how things are going. I told you things were in flux, good, but
yeah,
in flux. And I mentioned this only because you brought up the pandemic and how things shift and
sure.
what your identity is. And I talked about um, just how for myself specifically, from my experience, just how the future is just uncharted,
Yeah.
uncharted, uh, especially as a father. My
Mm,
dad brought me up in a different society, in a
yeah,
different
yeah,
world. I mean, it just looks completely different.
totally.
We talk about success. I love hearing people's definition of success because it's not one that's standard. So I
Mm,
think I've reached success where they came to this country as immigrants, and now I don't have to worry about the things they worried about. I don't need
that's right.
to work multiple jobs to, have food on the table, clothes on our backs, a roof over our heads, none of that. So
Mm,
for me, that's success. I
mhm,
mean,
mhm,
but it is weird how when you do reach that point that might be for you, it's like, okay, what else is there?
mhm.
And I've
Yeah.
had that conversation with plenty of guests where it's like you may reach a goal, but then what is beyond that?
Mm,
So it's a very interesting conversation about where we think the end goal may be. And when we move there, when we get there, it's like the goalposts have shifted and they've
mm,
moved back, or they look different, or maybe they're
that's right.
higher, or whatever it may be. So I appreciate everyone sharing their definitions of success and what that looks like, because I think it's important for people to hear those different ideas.
Yeah,
Theirs doesn't
yeah,
have to match yours. It doesn't have to
that's
match
right.
mine, but maybe they may be feeling stressed because society's definition of success
Mhm.
doesn't tie into their values.
Yeah, that's so beautiful what you just said because if we are sort of made by in our environments to want more. There's always more. There's always more. There's always more. And then I know this is like blasphemy, but like when is it enough? Right?
Yeah.
And please for your listeners, like I'm not saying, "Hey, I'm Christian, you should live in poverty." That's not what I'm saying at all. But what I'm saying is, where are we finding the fulfillment? Where are we finding the significance? Where are we finding what's filling that hole that wants that we need to go for more? And I struggle because I've always gone for more and there's always been something more. And so we were just talking about this. When I have downtime, I'm sort of like, wait a minute, that's really uncomfortable for me because I'm used to like going. And it's like God saying, no, 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 no. Like, but I want you to go, I want you to do this, I want you to dive into this book, or I want you to be in my word or whatever. And that's always been a challenge for me, which is part of my temperament. But we have to really get clear on what is the benefit of that more, and does it align to our values like you just said? Because if family is a value, but going for more um takes us away from our family, like then what's that benefit? you know?
Yeah. Yeah, those are all great points that you bring up. Yeah, I mean, the only thing you could tell people is like really reassess, self-assess to determine if you feel fulfilled or not.
Absolutely.
They may fall into society's trap. So if you need the bigger house, you need the flashy cars, like you have
Mhm.
to post it on social media and share what you have, this and that.
Right.
But I think most people deep down inside may feel some kind of emptiness, like, okay, even if
Mhm.
I have these things, there's something that missing.
Mm.
I'm just asking people just to listen to their gut,
Yeah.
because even if other people see you have those things, that isn't quite fulfillment right there. So my message is just be aware of what it is you need.
Yeah. Totally.
I think people they get that voice speaking in their ear, whispering in their ear that
Mhm.
something's missing, that something's
Mm.
off. But they don't listen because again, society wants it to
Mm.
look this way. So thank you for sharing all of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, Erin, can we jump into your book? Can you
Yeah.
introduce the book, please,
For
and just
sure.
kind of give us some background on what it is that led up to your writing it? When did that idea start? How long did it take? Anything that leads up to the publishing of the book? What played out? How did it play out?
Yeah. So what played out is I started my podcast in February of 2019, and the reason I started a podcast, was I had listened to so many podcasts and training, et cetera, in my car. My car was kind of my rolling university. That's what we were taught in network marketing. And so when my, when my coach said, "Start this podcast," I thought, "Okay, that's great. I'll have all this content. I don't quite know what I'm gonna do with it, but whatever." And in the fall, it was like August of 2019, I said, "Man, like, I just feel like there's more ways to get this message out." And she said, "Well, you need to write a book." And I thought, "You are crazy. No, that is not happening." But she said, "You have 9 months, 8 months of content. You already have the content for the book. Let's write a book." So that's what I started doing. So literally what I did is I had every single episode transcribed in my office behind me. I kind of laid it all out on the ground and started to put it together in sections, and then started writing, like cleaning things up and shortening things, and that. Then I searched for an editor. I found an editor who was great, but we in the end we were not quite the right fit for each other. And she did what is painful for an author, is she kind of took my book and like ripped it all up and put it back together and said, "Okay, well, it needs to go this way, and this is very repetitive." And so that was painful, but at the same time, like I knew I was going to self-publish, and I didn't want it to be. I had seen self-publishing not done well,
Mhm.
and I did not want it to be that. And I wanted this book, Pursuing Success God's Way, to be a practical guide, like I say here, right? I wanted people to read my story, and then I wanted to give them like the step by step instructions of how to do it. So she had to rip it apart. So that's what she did. And that kind of took us into early 2020, yeah, early 2020. And then I, we parted ways, and at that point, I just needed somebody to sort of like line edit and look at the punctuation and the grammar and whatever. So I hired a good friend of mine to do that, which was so perfect because she had been walking out a journey, and she just brought so much to the process in really questioning, like, was this really what happened? Or what about this? And so that was beautiful. And then we laid it out, and it went live on Amazon like March 31st of 2020. And leading up to that, of course, the world's starting to shut down. I'm self-publishing. I don't have any book tour. I don't have any of that kind of stuff. But I was definitely talking about it like with my book launch team, and kind of getting it out there. But I at the same time, I never like I wasn't going for bestseller status. None of that was important to me. What was important was go publish this book.
Mhm.
And so that's what I did. And I think at the height, like right around the time that we launched it, I reached like, I don't know, I think it was number 12 in Christian Business or something like that. But the ripple effect was all of these people that I personally knew who bought it. I had, real estate agents buying copies to give to their title company partners and their insurance partners. But it also gave me the platform to speak from so much of what's in the book. So that's really kind of where it came from. We just celebrated 3 years in March. And now I use the book, certainly when I'm speaking, I have it available and I give it to every coaching client that I start working with. But it's been so cool to have people say to me, like, hey, I'm not even a woman in business, but this helped me in my workplace, or this helped me in my volunteer role, or like we talked about leadership earlier, right? Any of those people are leading something.
Yeah,
And so it's really helped so many people beyond what I thought it would.
that's amazing. So, what does the path look like that you lead the reader through? What does that journey look like?
So in the first 3 chapters, I really tell my story, right? What is the impetus for this book? What does it even look like to what is this concept of hustle with heart? Like, what does that even mean? And how did I come to that place? And then from there it gets really practical. In chapter 4, I break down that practical guide into 5 key ways that we hustle with heart. And then chapter 5, I talk about, okay, now we've got to take action, because I don't know about you, but I've read plenty of books. I've been to plenty of classes that I did nothing with. So I really wanted them to not just know the 5 principles, but okay, but how do I take action on that? In chapter 6, we talk about roadblocks, right? Because now you know where you're going. Now you're taking action, and what's going to happen? You're going to hit the obstacles, right? People are going to think you're crazy, like just all kinds of things. So we really talk about, what does it look like to overcome those obstacles? What does that even mean? And how do you do it? In chapter 7, I talk about it all sort of coming full circle, right? And how do you continue to do this? How do you um how do you keep moving forward in it? I call it the circle of life. Is that chapter. And then it ends in chapter 8 with which probably is the shortest chapter, about, okay, now you know how to do this, but it's a daily decision to do it and to give God the glory as you're doing it. At the end of each chapter, there's also questions for the reader to be able to really walk through and journal on and ask themselves. There's some exercises throughout the book. And then at the very end, of course, there's all the references and that sort of thing. But I also give them a list of resources, a list of other books that I've read, other places that I got information. I created a playlist that they could listen to as they go along in the book. And then I also have a section for anybody that wants to use it, like for book club.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned playlist. I just picked up a book. I think it's called The Leaders Playlist.
Mm,
Looking at my stacks, I don't think I have
yeah.
it in there yet. But what is your intention with that? I can imagine, but what is your I want to hear it from you. What is your intention with that playlist? Like, is it inspiration? Just how did you come to use a playlist for these purposes?
So music has really been important to me my whole life. And I very often have, some Spotify channel playing while I'm writing, while I'm working, etc. And I thought, man, if someone else like me needs to have music or noise or TV or something going on in the background while they're reading, while they're working, whatever, what would be the songs that would speak to what they're learning in this book? I find that God speaks to me a lot through music, where
Mm,
I'll be in a moment and then a song will come on the radio and I'm like, "Okay, I hear you." So for me, it was very much about, what are the songs that reinforce what message God has given me and what I'm teaching in this book, so then they could use that playlist, whether they're reading, whether they're working, whatever that is, to then, reinforce the idea of what it means to pursue success God's way.
yeah, I mean that book I think just recently came out, maybe last year, but it's
Mhm.
interesting that it works in that same kind of fashion that you're
Yeah.
talking about. So, you came out before talking about the importance of that playlist. I'm the same way. I always have the music going.
Yeah.
And there are little things in songs that jump out at you and can change your mood.
Yeah, for sure.
Aaron, I think, and I didn't write them all down, but I think, was it in chapter 4, chapter 5, you spoke about the 5 things,
The 5 principles.
the 5 principles. Can you just
Yes.
go through those? You don't
Yeah,
have to
for
give away
sure.
the store, but, just kinda give a brief rundown of what those look like.
Yeah. So this is in chapter 4, which is talks about the 5 principles. So the first principle is yielding your fruit. You said this earlier, success, the way you define success is different than the way I do. It's very different for every person. And so often the world wants us competing and comparing ourselves. So, yielding your fruit is the fact that you were made with a purpose. I was made with a purpose. Go yield your fruit. Like my fruit is
Mhm.
not yours and yours is not mine. The second principle is faith and trust. And what I meant by this was, it's not just having faith. Like faith is that's great, but you've got to step out and trust. Trust is the action of
Mhm.
faith. So you've got to be willing to have the faith, but then step out, right? I mean, like Martin Luther King says, right? Faith is taking the first step, even when you don't see the whole staircase. So there's an element of you've got to put your faith into action. Principle 3 is surrender. So now we've talked about yielding our fruit. We've talked about having faith and trust. And very often the reason they're in this order is because we're like, okay, great, I'm all in. And then something happens, you're like, oh no, I want this my way. Right. So surrender is that third principle. And it's probably the hardest. It really is the hardest thing that we can do, especially for high achieving women, because like we know what it takes and we want to just go do it and get it done. The fourth principle is focus over FOMO. So, FOMO, fear of missing out. It's really about focusing on Christ until steady. That's sort of the initialism that Holy Spirit gave me for the word focus. But it's really about what are we focusing on? Are we looking left and right and trying to do what everyone else is doing or trying to have what everyone else is having? Or are we focused on what God has given us? And then the last principle is really about putting ego aside. Beyond surrender, it's about giving glory where glory is due. So it's giving the glory to God. And the this came up for me because I had a friend of mine in my network marketing business. She had reached a promotion, and they were live streaming. And as soon as she stepped on the stage, she looked up and pointed up because she wanted to give God the glory. Like, yes, she had done the work, but he had positioned her and he had prepared her. So that fifth principle is so key because the world will want us to take credit for all of it, but
Mm.
we're never in it alone. So,
Wow, okay. Um, yeah, there's so many great points in there. You had mentioned before that somebody had said, "I'm not a businesswoman, but I read the book." Have you and this happened with another book somebody had covered where it wasn't necessarily their target market, this person who was commenting, but they read it anyway and they bought copies for their loved ones or whoever the target market was in their life. Have you gotten comments from men at all about the book?
a, a couple here and there. And I don't know. I mean, I talk about the book being for ambitious women,
Mhm.
but I have had a couple of men. I was recently on a podcast and the gentleman had read the book thoroughly and asked me a lot of questions about it, which was really cool. So here and there, but definitely I would say the vast majority giving me feedback are women.
What was, that gentleman's takeaway? I'm just always curious when a
Yeah,
book is written for, say, one gender or the other,
sure.
or whoever it may be, what someone else can take away, even if they aren't that specific demographic that the book
Sure.
is for. I think there's
Yeah.
so many lessons you can draw regardless. So I'm curious what that gentleman or the host of that podcast, what he had taken away from reading the book.
Yeah, exactly what you just said. There's so much that we can learn. And this idea of pursuing success God's way, while I wrote it for women, anybody can use this. Anybody can use this. And that was his point. He said, I don't struggle with all of these things the way perhaps your audience does, but there are things in this book that I absolutely understand or that I absolutely know is a daily practice for me. Like it is a daily practice for me to surrender. It is a daily practice for me to give God the glory, right? So all of those lessons really do apply. And then the other thing that's fascinating, what came out of this book also is a framework that I use with my clients called the 4 keys: define, direct, discipline, and develop. And I find that, yes, that is solely based in the Lord. However, even for unbelievers, even for those who, their faith is elsewhere, those ideas of how do we define success and how do I define myself around it and how do I take direction and what does that look like and how do I put it into action with discipline and then how do I allow myself to develop kind of this, closed loop, if you will, that it's applicable to any audience, even though I didn't write it for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so many people come across that. I mean, just in the same way we've talked about all these other issues of success and values and um that's I'm assuming yes, even men or whomever could take away great lessons from it, but I was just curious if you had examples. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Um Aaron, another question I ask my authors is always in writing it, what lessons did you take away? Now, some of them have spoken to the actual writing of the process of writing, and you mentioned that in editing and how you wanted to self-publish. Aside from the publishing and writing process, was there anything that were aha moments to you, things where you got greater clarity about what you're writing, things you saw in a new way? Were there any major changes in you just from having created this book?
Yeah, what I experienced was a couple of things. One was just the reiteration, if you will, that this is the message that God gave me. Like before, I knew that, I knew, right? Like this is what he told me to talk about. But as I was writing it, because some of it was content that I had already created because of the podcast, it was fascinating to actually read it in print
Hmm.
and have to do some editing around it because I was like, yes, that's exactly right, right? And so it was kind of saying to myself like, "Wow, you got that spot on." Yeah, I still feel that, right? And so the reiteration of those lessons even for myself. I mean, they're so often I have a battered book copy of the book beside me that I go back to. I think, "Hold
Hmm.
on, wait a minute. I've learned this lesson, but what does it say?" And so that was huge growth. And then really understanding through that process that the depth of each of kind of the topics in here, right? Like I had hit it on a surface level in the podcast, went deeper in the book, but even walking away from writing the book going, man, we need to open that up even further. So those two things really struck me as lessons.
What do you think? I mean, there's some authors that they just recently published their book, and I'm already asking them what their next book is going to be about. And they're like, John, I just put this out. I'm doing the PR for this book. Yours is a little safer to ask because it's been 3 years, but what do you think your next book will be about or what
So
it'll cover?
yeah, I have two thoughts on that. The first thought is when I was a parent of young children, I read a book called I Don't Know How She Does It. It was fictional, but it was about this mom who was like juggling all the things, right? And after reading that book and then listening to some of my friends talk about the things they were juggling and the things I knew I was juggling, I had a vision, which I still have, and I one day need to do this, to write a book called The Keeper of Information. And it's all about how moms are the keepers. Like we just are, right? We know who gets what for lunch. We know who takes what medicine. We
No
know who
argument
has
here.
what, right? And so
No
that to me
argument
is,
here.
yeah, that to me is sort of a collection of stories, which I think would be hilarious. So that's out there. But following this book, I really would love to do an updated version because there's so much more depth in some of this that I'd love to dig into. For a long time, I thought I would do a book tentatively titled The Thorn in My Side. And that was really about my struggle of stepping out of a toxic culture in multi-level marketing and into this business, but like it never went away, right? It was still there to teach me lessons. So I don't know. I mean, that could certainly be next. I'm also empty nest, so I don't know if I might write something on that, but I'm all open for wherever God's gonna show me where to go.
Yeah. And then another question I have is what obviously we're here discussing your book. What book has impacted or influenced
Mm.
you the most? Which one stands out the most for you?
Ooh, the most. Well, the Bible. I mean, that's the most. Yeah.
Yeah, I've had actually that's the first book that's repeated on here. And the
Mm,
great thing about that is when I asked the second person which book they'd like to cover, they said, "Oh, the Bible, but I see that you already have somebody that covered the Bible." But I told them, I'm like, "Yeah, but that person's perception, the
yeah.
takeaways, the experience is gonna be different from yours." And they
Mm,
were two completely different conversations.
yeah.
Um, it's just interesting how people can even in writing books, they ask me, why are you writing topic or why are you reading books on like the same types of topics about leadership?
Mm,
Everybody's
mm.
going to have their unique voice, their unique
That's right.
experiences, the different wording that they bring to the conversation. So it's interesting that the Bible is the first repeat book on this series. It
Mm,
shouldn't shock
mhm.
me, but it did surprise me a little.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
um And Aaron, you've spoken about the lessons that you hope people take away, but how would you kind of sum it up in a few sentences, the major takeaways that you would hope somebody would take away from the book? Maybe somebody that doesn't think the book might be for them, but
Mm.
how would you kind of convince them that this is something that they should read?
Yeah. The number one lesson would be you're not in this alone. We have a creator who perfectly created us. Like, we're not perfect, right? But the way that he's given us gifts and talents and skills and our temperaments and all of these pieces. But there is quite a lot of noise around being strong and powerful and being a boss babe or a boss mom. What I find fascinating about that is there are none of those kinds of names for men in business, which is sort of funny. I mean, I don't know. But so much is placed on you doing it yourself and trudging along and pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and making it happen. And so that first thing is you aren't made to do this alone. Like, you're just not. If if you have been given a business, it is the place to administer the gifts, the talents, the skills, etc. If you are a believer in Jesus, you've been given that business as a vehicle to impact the kingdom. Now, that doesn't mean that you're specifically only working with Christian clients. You could be working with a secular audience, but it is something that God has given you so graciously to walk out these gifts and talents to help and serve others, right? So you're not made to do it alone. You don't have to carry it alone. And I'm not good at that. Like, I will bring every grocery bag in from the car because I want to make one trip and I never ask for help, right?
Hmm.
So you're not made to do this by yourself is the number one thing. The second thing is that when you follow these principles, you're going to begin to understand that you don't have to do business as usual, that there is a calmer, more peaceful, more joyful way to do business. Is it going to be easy? No, but there is an ease and a calm about how to do that. And and when you begin to embrace that, a couple of things will happen. The way you look at business and the way you interact with your business will be different. But you will also have people that are drawn to work with you because you approach their business problems with such a calm demeanor. There will be something different about you in the way that you approach your business that people will go, I don't know, I just have to work with you. Right. And we could all use more empathy and compassion in the marketplace. And I believe that that's what this really brings people to is how do I do business in a way that's not aggressive, not overwhelming, not overachieving, and still reach whatever levels of success, still earn money, still serve clients, right? Is that possible? Yes. You were made to do that. That is possible.
And I'm also curious because of the women that you work with, the faith-based nature of your work. What what kind of issues, what kind of problems or challenges did you see specifically because of the pandemic and everything that it brought upon the world, society? How did your client base, their needs change from pre-pandemic to the
Mm,
pandemic? What were you
mm.
seeing?
A few things. Disconnection for sure. I mean, certainly as, we were all quarantining or whatever, there was great disconnection. Now, for some people, because they're more introverted, like that's easy, right? But for others, like myself, that's challenging because we get our energy from being around people. So they were feeling like, well, I want to do business this way, but I don't have anybody that I can really interact with around it. And now we're all in lockdown. So there's nobody that I can interact with. The second thing is their question of their tribe, if you will. And what I mean by that is when you start to step out and you're obedient and doing things God's way, there will be people who will think you're nuts. I had people who said, "I just wish that you could go back to being who you were," right? Like it was really uncomfortable for them that the way I did business was different. And so women they needed people that understood what that looked like because their faith community didn't understand business and their business community didn't
Hmm.
understand doing it with God. And so I saw the need to pull them together, through the podcast, through the book, and then through my group coaching. I would say the third thing that I saw happen was actually a very good thing is that it gave them this chance, which I think it gave everyone this chance to pause and take a breath and evaluate, is what I'm doing aligned to my values, aligned to my gifts and my talents? Have I just been on this hamster wheel for the sake of the recognition, the accolades, and the money? But what would it look like if I did something that was truly aligned to how I made, right? And so I saw many women start to evaluate that because they had a moment to breathe because our we never have that. And what came out of that was many of my clients deciding to, add on a vertical to their business or to expand or to work with a different audience or whatever that looked like. And that has been really exciting and fun to watch them step into that in places they never thought they would go, but it's because they never took the downtime to really dig deep and evaluate it.
Yeah, I've talked about the pandemic so much, just how it did provide a forum for those points that you provided. You realized how alone you were,
Mm,
which kind of forced you to go inward. I mean, I've met so many authors that put together their books during the pandemic. Values were reassessed, careers were reassessed, opportunities were found, networking, either if you thought outside of the box, cliche, right? If you got innovative about how you did your networking, you'd be fine. Some people were kind of just like, okay, well, there is no traditional networking. So, kind of like what that person had mentioned, or the example that you provided. But I found, with the virtual world, my
mm.
networking exploded just because
Yeah,
there were people out there trying to find camaraderie or find stories. That's
right.
the way this podcast happened, was just kind of feeling more comfortable on video, having
Yeah.
conversations. People were being honest about the fears that they had. They're
Mm,
in their home space, so they're
right.
more open, they're more honest. They're not like, at a bar somewhere at a networking event wearing a
Mm,
name
mm,
tag. They
mm,
are who they are, and they just turned on the computer, jumped in, and voiced who they were.
right.
So it's been such an era of, I think you can call it that. It's not even it's just an era of transformation, if you opted
Mm,
for it, if you were
mm,
okay with it, if you stepped into it. So that's why in most instances I always ask that question. I'm just curious for someone's client base, what did they see? I'm always curious about those transformations.
yeah, yeah.
So, Erin, just in wrapping up, is there anything else that you might want to share about what you're up to these days, or anything you might want to share with this audience about any projects, anything coming up that you want to put out there?
Yeah, I definitely, of course, people can connect with me on one-on-one coaching. One of the things that has evolved in my space this year, started late last year, is strategic work because I'm strategically focused and I've always done that. And so it's been really cool to work with some different clients on spending a day giving them seeing their business from a 30,000-foot view and then distilling it and putting plans in place and mapping that out in a way that is tangible.
Mhm.
So, especially for those really creative, not even creative artsy types, but people who are just sort of all over the place, and helping them to get focused and spending a day with them around that. So I do the strategy days, and then I've also started to do some half day retreats here in Maryland in the Annapolis area so that people can come together just for 4 hours and work through a particular topic with respect to doing business with God and that sort of thing. And that's been really exciting. So those things are here. They can find all of that on my website, of course. And I just would encourage everybody, it's sort of an old adage of just read 10 pages a day. And I don't always do that. I'm not a person that reads, 52 books in a year. That's just not who I am. I often
Mhm.
have multiple books going at a time. But
Yeah.
going
I
back
used
to
to be
that
the same way. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, but going back to that first principle, yield your fruit. Like, what works for everyone else doesn't may not work for you, and find your way to take in the
Yeah.
information that you need and to do the reading and that sort of thing. When I was writing this book, it didn't work for me to block out like today I'm going to write for 2 hours. That didn't work for me.
Yeah.
That is still not something that works for me. I look at my calendar and say, "Okay, I've got these blocks of time. All right, God, what do you want me to use it for?" Okay, you want me to work on the blog, or you want me to work on whatever. So just know yielding your fruit is understanding how you uniquely work. And yes, it teaches that in my book. And that's just like an adage for life. Like, I think one of the things the pandemic taught us, John, is also that we all work differently, and it's not cookie cutter, and it doesn't have to
Yeah.
be. And I think that's been a rule in some way forever. And, I think people got to show up and work the way that best works for them, and they get to be, more productive and happier in doing it.
Yeah, more in tune with themselves. I mean, yield
Yeah.
your fruit. That's a great lesson that I've seen play out with my clients, where the majority of them, when they've reached that next level of performance, when they've reached that next level of fulfillment, happiness, joy, right? They come in like, tight, tense, stressed out, maybe, no
Right.
color to their face. They just don't seem happy. And this
Yeah.
isn't even an exaggeration. I mean, I worked with a couple people where it was night and day from when I
Mhm.
took them on as a client to maybe a year later when they've maybe evolved in the job they were in, left to go to their dream job, whatever it may be.
Mhm.
And then a year later, they just their family was happier, their home life was
Right.
happier, their work was happier, it was moving along. eh, they loved their job. There was love in their job. There was happiness in their job. It's not
Yeah.
just numbers.
Yeah.
It's not just a paycheck. It became
Right.
more to them. And the distinguishing factor between pre and post coaching was that they found their unique voice.
Yeah.
That in a lot of examples, I found they went back to their childhood and found what their initial passion or driver was for their career, what
Yeah.
they wanted, and brought it forward. Because we tend to have a passion when we're younger, go to college, and then we put that passion down. We're like, okay, here's the job, there's the ladder. I got to go up the
Mm.
script across
Mm.
all these pages and get the house and the white picket fence and this and that. But then they forget what, again, fulfills
Yeah.
them, what their passion
Yeah.
is, what their core is. And that's the main driver. That's the main switch in my coaching. And you've probably seen it as well. When they get in tune with what they forget their voices,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
yield that
Totally.
fruit, anybody, even when I speak to students and they haven't, I'm helping them with their networking and their professional development. They're like, well, I haven't worked jobs, so there's nothing I can contribute.
Mhm. Mm-mm.
It's like, even as a student, like, what kind of jobs did you have in high school? Or did you play
Right.
sports in high school? Did you volunteer in high school? Even if you didn't do anything, maybe something was missing in your life and that's why you didn't do anything. What are you passionate about? What do you want to
Mm.
do? Like all these kinds of questions. So I
Yeah.
love that yield your fruit is like that top of the list, because I think that's so important. I think people go through life shut down because they maybe don't think that they can offer what they're all about. Maybe
Mm.
don't know that they should be looking for that inner light, that inner driver,
Mm.
that inner strength and energy they can put out there. So I think that's such a great lesson. And just the way that you put it, yield your fruit. Like that's what you're supposed to put out there.
That's right. Yeah.
So awesome. I love that. So Erin's book is Pursuing Success God's Way, a practical guide to hustle with heart. Erin, thank you for sitting down for this conversation with me. I appreciate your time.
Oh, it's been such an honor. I love this conversation, and thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And yeah, I would love to have you back on. I tell all my authors I'd love to have them back on to discuss the book that impacted them. So we'll do that in the future.
Yeah. Love it.
So if there's anything that I might have missed in this conversation, I keep my authors and my guests here for a while, but there's so much more that I can ask, so much more we can talk about. If there is anything else that you would want to hear, let me know and I'll reach out to Erin, see if I can get those responses that you're curious about. In the meantime, thank you for watching, listening, subscribing, and taking this journey with me. I appreciate everything that I've gotten back from people about this series, and it's evolved. I mean, it started about asking people about the books that have made the biggest impact on them. And it's evolved into profiling great people that are out there, amazing work that they're doing, and how they want to just put that out there. I think
Mm.
great conversations like this, I think they're just powerful. And I love that people are listening and taking things away for themselves, their life. I mean, anything that we hear in a great conversation, we take away for ourselves, our
Mm.
business, our family. It just ripple effects through everything we do. So I appreciate my guests and then everybody listening and watching. So until the next episode, take care. I'll talk to you soon.